It was 3 in the morning when my home security system started pinging anomalies. I rolled out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah, and padded down to my home office. 20 years in cybersecurity had taught me that late-night alerts usually meant either a false positive or something very, very bad. I pulled up the diagnostic dashboard on my monitor, expecting to see the usual ghost signals from neighborhood Wi-Fi networks, or maybe a delivery drone that had wandered too close to our perimeter sensors. What I found instead made my blood run cold. There was a rogue GPS tracker broadcasting live location data from somewhere on our property. The signal was strong, consistent, and completely unauthorized. I ran a deeper scan, cross-referencing the device signature against my company's extensive database of tracking hardware. The results hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just any GPS tracker. This was one of ours, a Genesis 7 Alpha unit, manufactured exclusively by my firm, Blackwater Digital Security, for government agencies and Fortune 500 corporations. I stared at the screen for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had planted a military-grade surveillance device on my property, and they had used my own technology to do it. The tracker was broadcasting to an external server every 30 seconds, uploading precise longitude and latitude coordinates along with speed and directional data. I pulled up the heat map and felt my stomach drop. The signal was coming from directly underneath Sarah's Honda Civic. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped on shoes and a jacket and crept out to the garage. The night air was crisp, and the suburban silence felt suddenly oppressive. I grabbed a flashlight from my workbench and knelt beside Sarah's car, running the beam along the undercarriage. There it was, secured with industrial-strength magnets to the rear axle housing. A sleek black box no bigger than a deck of cards, blinking softly with a tiny blue status light. I recognized it immediately because I had signed off on its design specifications myself just 2 years ago. Back in my office, I began pulling data logs from the device. The Genesis 7 Alpha was designed for corporate espionage prevention and government surveillance operations, which meant it kept meticulous records of its own activity. I accessed the internal memory remotely, using my company's backdoor protocols, and started downloading everything. Installation timestamp, activation records, data transmission logs, even the IP address of the receiving server. What I found painted a disturbing picture of systematic surveillance that had been going on for weeks. The device had been activated 3 weeks ago at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I cross-referenced that date and time with our family calendar and felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. That was the day Karen Pemberton and her Neighborhood Watch Committee had conducted their so-called courtesy inspection of our property while we were at work. They had claimed it was a routine compliance check to ensure our landscaping met community standards, but now I understood the real purpose of their visit. Karen Pemberton was the president of our Homeowners Association and the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood morality. She was a woman in her early 60s with perfectly coiffed silver hair and the kind of perpetual smile that never quite reached her eyes. From the moment Sarah and I had moved into Willow Creek Estates 6 months ago, Karen had made it clear that she was watching us. She attended every homeowners meeting with a clipboard and a disapproving frown, taking notes on residents who parked their cars at odd angles or left their garbage cans out too long after pickup day. At first, her behavior had seemed merely eccentric, the kind of busybody behavior you expect in a gated community where people have too much time and too little excitement in their lives. But, as the weeks passed, Karen's attention had focused increasingly on Sarah and me. She questioned why we traveled so frequently for work. She wanted to know why Sarah sometimes came home late from her job at the marketing firm downtown. She had even gone so far as to suggest that our modern furniture and minimalist decorating style were somehow inappropriate for the neighborhood's traditional aesthetic. The breaking point had come 2 months ago, when Sarah missed 3 consecutive homeowners association meetings due to work travel. Karen had showed up at our door the following week with a formal written notice demanding an explanation for Sarah's absences. When Sarah politely explained that her job required occasional travel to client sites, Karen's expression had turned suspicious and cold. She had made some vague comments about married women who spent too much time away from home and husbands who were too trusting for their own good. I pulled up the GPS data and began mapping Sarah's movements over the past 3 weeks. The level of detail was staggering. Every trip to the grocery store, every lunch meeting, Every evening yoga class had been meticulously tracked and recorded. I could see the exact route she took to work each morning, how long she spent at client meetings, even which parking spot she used at the shopping center. It was a complete violation of privacy that would have been illegal regardless of who was doing it, but the fact that it was being orchestrated by our Homeowners Association president made it feel particularly sinister. The data transmission logs showed that all of this information was being uploaded to a server registered to an IP address in our own neighborhood. I ran a reverse lookup and felt my anger crystallize into something cold and focused. The server was located at Karen Pemberton's house, just 4 blocks away from ours. She wasn't just spying on us. She was building a comprehensive digital dossier of my wife's daily activities. Instead of confronting Karen immediately, I decided to gather more evidence. 20 years in cybersecurity had taught me that the best way to catch someone in illegal surveillance was to let them think they were getting away with it while you quietly documented everything they were doing. I began monitoring the data stream from the GPS tracker, creating my own logs of what information was being collected and when it was being transmitted. I also decided to dig deeper into Karen's activities. If she was willing to plant illegal surveillance devices on residents' cars, what else might she be doing? I submitted a formal request to conduct a security audit of the Homeowners Association's computer systems, citing concerns about potential data breaches and cyber vulnerabilities. As a resident and a cybersecurity professional, I had every right to ensure that our community's digital infrastructure was secure. Karen approved the audit request with suspicious enthusiasm, probably thinking it would give her an opportunity to demonstrate her competence as association president. What she didn't realize was that I was about to gain legitimate access to every computer, server, and network device under her control. The audit began the following Monday, and within hours I had uncovered a digital surveillance operation that went far beyond a single GPS tracker. Karen had been systematically monitoring multiple residents through a network of hidden cameras, unauthorized access to private Wi-Fi networks, and illegal interception of email communications. She had files on dozens of families, complete with schedules, financial information, and detailed notes about their personal relationships. The scope of her surveillance activities was breathtaking and completely illegal. I found email threads where Karen discussed residents with her inner circle of association board members, speculating about affairs, drug use, and financial problems based on her unauthorized surveillance. She had compiled what she called behavioral reports on families she deemed problematic, recommending fines, warnings, and in some cases suggesting they be forced to sell their homes and leave the community. The GPS tracker on Sarah's car was just one piece of a much larger operation designed to exert control over the entire neighborhood through intimidation and privacy violations. Karen had created her own little surveillance state, with herself as the all-seeing authority figure who decided which residents deserved to live in peace and which ones needed to be driven out. As I documented Karen's activities, she began escalating her harassment of Sarah. It started with passive-aggressive comments during chance encounters at the mailbox or grocery store. Karen would make pointed remarks about wives who worked too much or traveled too frequently, always delivered with that same cold smile. Then came the anonymous notes left on our door, questioning Sarah's fidelity and suggesting that I should pay closer attention to my wife's activities. The harassment reached a new level when Karen began openly confronting Sarah in public. She cornered Sarah at the community pool one Saturday afternoon and launched into a tirade about neighborhood morality standards. According to Sarah, Karen had accused her of setting a bad example for other wives in the community by being away from home so frequently. She suggested that Sarah's work travel was just a cover for extramarital affairs, and that her behavior was undermining the traditional family values that Willow Creek Estates was supposed to represent. Karen's accusations were completely baseless and deeply offensive, but they represented more than just personal harassment. She was using her position as association president to create a hostile environment designed to force us out of our home. The GPS tracking was just one tool in a broader campaign of intimidation that included surveillance, harassment, and character assassination. I realized that Karen's behavior was escalating towards something potentially dangerous. She had crossed the line from annoying busybody to criminal stalker, and she showed no signs of stopping. It was time to bring in law enforcement and legal representation. I contacted my attorney and arranged a meeting to discuss filing criminal charges and a civil lawsuit against Karen and the Homeowners Association. My attorney, Rebecca Morrison, was a specialist in privacy law and cybercrime. When I showed her the evidence I had gathered, her expression grew increasingly grim. The GPS tracking alone constituted multiple felonies, including stalking, conspiracy, and wiretapping violations. The broader surveillance operation I had uncovered represented one of the most comprehensive privacy violations she had ever seen outside of a corporate espionage case. Rebecca immediately contacted the district attorney's office and arranged for a detective to review the evidence. Detective Martinez from the cybercrime unit was assigned to the case, and within hours of reviewing my documentation, he was preparing search warrants for Karen's home and the Homeowners Association offices. The Genesis 7 Alpha tracker that had started this investigation was about to become the centerpiece of a major criminal case. Meanwhile, Karen seemed oblivious to the fact that her illegal activities had been discovered. She continued her harassment campaign against Sarah, apparently confident that her position as association president made her untouchable. She scheduled a formal Homeowners Association hearing to consider fining us for what she called violations of community morality standards. The hearing was set for Thursday evening, and Karen sent out notices to all residents inviting them to attend and voice their concerns about inappropriate behavior in the neighborhood. What Karen didn't know was that Detective Martinez had been monitoring her communications as part of his investigation. The hearing she had scheduled was going to become the setting for her arrest. Rebecca and I decided to attend the meeting and let Karen dig her hole even deeper before the police moved in. Thursday evening arrived, and the community center was packed with residents who had come to see what Karen's latest drama was about. She had set up a formal hearing room with a table for the association board and chairs arranged for residents to present their concerns. Sarah and I took seats in the back, while Detective Martinez and 2 other officers waited outside in unmarked cars. Karen called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a presentation about the importance of maintaining moral standards in the community. She displayed charts and graphs showing what she claimed were statistics about property values and neighborhood stability. Then she turned her attention to Sarah and me, accusing us of behavior that she said was inappropriate for a family community. Karen presented her case with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. She talked about the importance of wives being present in the home and husbands taking responsibility for their family's behavior. She suggested that residents who traveled frequently or worked unusual hours were potentially engaged in activities that could damage the community's reputation. Her presentation lasted nearly 30 minutes, and with each passing moment, she was building a stronger case against herself for harassment and discrimination. When Karen finished her presentation, she opened the floor for comments from other residents. What happened next was not what she had expected. Instead of support for her position, resident after resident stood up to criticize her surveillance and harassment activities. People had been comparing notes, and they were discovering that Karen's invasive behavior extended far beyond Sarah and me. Mrs. Patterson from Oak Street revealed that Karen had been questioning her teenage daughter about her after-school activities. Mr. Patterson. Jen disclosed that Karen had demanded access to his home Wi-Fi network under the pretense of community security. The Rodriguez family shared emails they had received from Karen criticizing their choice to install solar panels without association approval. A pattern of harassment and control was emerging that had affected dozens of families. As the meeting progressed, Karen became increasingly defensive and agitated. She began making threats about fines and legal action against residents who questioned her authority. She claimed that as association president, she had broad powers to investigate and regulate behavior that might affect property values or community standards. Her mask of polite authority was slipping, revealing the paranoid control freak underneath. That was when Rebecca stood up and addressed the room. She introduced herself as our attorney and announced that criminal charges were being filed against Karen for illegal surveillance and harassment. She explained that evidence had been gathered showing systematic privacy violations affecting multiple residents, and that law enforcement was prepared to take immediate action. Karen's face went white as Rebecca continued speaking. The GPS tracker that had been planted on Sarah's car was described in detail, along with the broader surveillance network that had been uncovered during the association's security audit. Rebecca explained that residents had legal rights to privacy that could not be violated by homeowners association policies, no matter how they were justified. As Rebecca finished her statement, Detective Martinez and his team entered the community center. Karen's expression shifted from shock to panic as she realized what was happening. Detective Martinez approached the association board table and placed Karen under arrest for stalking, conspiracy, and multiple wiretapping violations. The formal charges would be filed the following morning, but Karen would be spending the night in jail. The arrest sent shockwaves through the room. Residents who had been intimidated by Karen's behavior for months were suddenly seeing her led away in handcuffs. The woman who had positioned herself as the moral authority of the neighborhood was being charged with serious felonies. The GPS tracker that she had thought would give her power over us had instead become the key piece of evidence that brought her down. Over the following weeks, the full scope of Karen's surveillance operation became public knowledge. Local news stations picked up the story, and it quickly became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked authority in residential communities. The Homeowners Association was sued into bankruptcy, with my cybersecurity firm providing expert testimony about the extent of the privacy violations that had occurred. The criminal case against Karen moved forward quickly, but not before additional disturbing details emerged during the investigation. Detective Martinez's forensic team discovered that Karen had been operating her surveillance network for nearly 3 years, long before Sarah and I had even moved to the neighborhood. She had files on every family in Willow Creek Estates, complete with detailed behavioral profiles, financial assessments, and what she called compliance ratings based on her personal standards of acceptable conduct. The deeper they dug, the more shocking Karen's activities became. She had been intercepting mail deliveries to gather information about residents' purchases and financial status. She had bribed the community maintenance staff to provide her with keys to homes when residents were away, allowing her to conduct unauthorized inspections of private property. She had even installed listening devices in the community center and pool area to record private conversations between neighbors. Perhaps most disturbing of all, Karen had been compiling what she called elimination lists of families she wanted to force out of the neighborhood. These lists included detailed strategies for harassment, surveillance, and legal intimidation, designed to make specific residents so uncomfortable that they would choose to leave. Sarah and I were near the top of her current elimination list, along with the Chen family who had installed solar panels and the Martinez family whose teenage son played guitar in a rock band. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case, Assistant United States Attorney Patricia Williams, described Karen's operation as one of the most comprehensive domestic surveillance schemes she had encountered outside of organized crime cases. The charges against Karen were expanded to include mail tampering, breaking and entering, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and racketeering under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The federal charges carried potential sentences of up to 20 years in prison. During the pretrial phase, Karen's defense attorney attempted to argue that her actions were motivated by legitimate community concerns and that homeowners association presidents had broad authority to ensure compliance with community standards. This defense strategy collapsed when prosecutors presented evidence showing that Karen had been selling information about residents to private investigators, debt collectors, and divorce attorneys. Her surveillance operation wasn't just about community control. It was also a profitable side business that generated thousands of dollars in monthly income. The revelation that Karen had been monetizing her neighbors' private information sent shockwaves through the legal community and attracted national media attention. Cable news programs featured legal experts discussing the case as an example of how homeowners associations could become vehicles for criminal enterprises. Privacy rights organizations used Karen's case as evidence for the need for stronger federal legislation protecting residents from association overreach. As the case developed, more victims came forward with stories of Karen's harassment and surveillance. The Hendersons revealed that Karen had been monitoring their teenage daughter's social media accounts and had contacted the girls' school to report supposed behavioral problems. The Williams family disclosed that Karen had been tracking their grocery purchases and had confronted them about buying what she considered excessive amounts of alcohol. The elderly Morrison couple shared perhaps the most heartbreaking story of all. Karen had been monitoring Mr. Second Plang, Morrison's medical appointments, and had used information about his cancer diagnosis to pressure the couple to sell their home, claiming that serious illness in the neighborhood could affect property values. She had actually suggested that terminally ill residents had a moral obligation to move to assisted living facilities rather than remain in the community where their condition might depress home prices. The evidence against Karen was so overwhelming that her attorney eventually advised her to accept a plea agreement rather than risk a trial that could result in decades in prison. She pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges and was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She was also ordered to pay over $400,000 in restitution to the families she had victimized and to surrender all surveillance equipment and data she had collected. Her conviction on federal wiretapping and racketeering charges meant that she would be a convicted felon for the rest of her life, with permanent restrictions on her ability to serve in positions of authority or access sensitive information. The judge who sentenced her described her actions as a betrayal of the trust that communities place in their elected leaders and a violation of the basic privacy rights that form the foundation of American society. The civil lawsuit against the Homeowners Association became a landmark case in residential privacy rights. Rebecca Morrison assembled a legal team that included specialists in constitutional law, privacy rights, and class action litigation. The lawsuit was expanded to include every resident of Willow Creek Estates as a plaintiff, seeking damages for invasion of privacy, emotional distress, and violation of civil rights under federal housing laws. The discovery phase of the civil case revealed even more damaging evidence about the scope of Karen's surveillance network. Expert witnesses from my company testified about the sophistication of the equipment Karen had deployed and the professional-level planning that had gone into her surveillance operations. The GPS tracker on Sarah's car was just one component of a multi-million-dollar surveillance infrastructure that included hidden cameras, wireless listening devices, network monitoring equipment, and data storage servers. The financial analysis conducted during the civil case showed that Karen had spent over $600,000 of Homeowners Association funds on surveillance equipment and private investigation services over a 3-year period. She had created fake invoices and fraudulent expense reports to hide these expenditures from other board members and residents. The money had come from community maintenance funds, emergency reserves, and special assessments that residents had paid believing the funds would be used for legitimate community improvements. Karen's co-conspirators on the Homeowners Association board were also named as defendants in the civil case. Vice President Margaret Foster and Treasurer Robert Hayes had either actively participated in the surveillance operations or had been willfully blind to Karen's activities, despite obvious signs that something illegal was happening. Email evidence showed that both Foster and Hayes had received and acted upon information obtained through Karen's illegal surveillance, including using that information to target specific residents for fines and harassment. The insurance company that provided liability coverage for the Homeowners Association initially attempted to deny coverage for Karen's criminal activities, arguing that illegal surveillance fell outside the scope of standard association policies. However, the legal team was able to demonstrate that the association's governing documents had been deliberately written to provide Karen with broad investigative powers that enabled her surveillance operations. The insurance company was ultimately forced to provide coverage for the civil settlement, which reached nearly $3 million. The impact of the case extended far beyond Willow Creek Estates. State legislators introduced bills requiring greater oversight of homeowners associations and establishing strict limits on their investigative powers. Privacy rights organizations used the case as a rallying point for broader reforms to protect residents from association overreach. Legal scholars wrote law review articles analyzing the case as an example of how residential governance structures could be corrupted and used to violate constitutional rights. The psychological impact on the community was profound and long-lasting. Many residents required counseling to deal with the trauma of discovering that their most private moments had been monitored and recorded by someone they had trusted as a community leader. Children in the neighborhood struggled with anxiety about privacy and security, knowing that an adult authority figure had been spying on their families for years. Sarah and I worked with mental health professionals to organize support groups for affected residents and their families. The violation of trust and privacy had created lasting psychological wounds that would take years to heal. Some families chose to leave the neighborhood despite winning the legal battle, feeling that the community would always be tainted by memories of Karen's surveillance regime. The media attention surrounding the case brought unwanted scrutiny to our quiet suburban community, but it also served an important educational purpose. National news programs used the story to highlight the growing problem of surveillance overreach in residential communities across the country. Privacy experts warned that Karen's case was likely not unique and that similar abuses were probably occurring in homeowners associations nationwide. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a broader investigation into surveillance abuses by homeowners associations, using our case as a model for identifying similar criminal enterprises. Several other associations in different states were subsequently investigated and prosecuted for privacy violations, suggesting that Karen's methods had been replicated elsewhere, or that multiple associations had independently developed similar surveillance programs. In a twist of poetic justice that seemed almost too perfect to be real, Karen's financial troubles resulting from the criminal restitution and civil judgment forced her into bankruptcy and foreclosure. Her house, which had served as the command center for her 3-year surveillance operation, was scheduled for auction by the county sheriff's office. The irony was not lost on anyone in the neighborhood that the woman who had tried to control everyone else's property was losing her own home as a direct consequence of her illegal activities. When I learned about the foreclosure auction, I saw an opportunity for both business expansion and symbolic justice. My cybersecurity firm had been growing rapidly, partly due to the publicity from Karen's case, and we needed additional space for training facilities and equipment testing. Karen's house was perfectly positioned for our needs, and purchasing it would provide a powerful teaching tool for our cybersecurity training programs. I submitted the winning bid at the auction, purchasing Karen's former command center for approximately 60% of its assessed value. The house was in excellent condition, which was not surprising given Karen's obsessive attention to property maintenance, but it required extensive modifications to serve as a professional training facility. The basement server room, where Karen had stored terabytes of illegally obtained surveillance data, was converted into a state-of-the-art cybersecurity laboratory. The renovation process revealed additional evidence of Karen's surveillance activities that had not been discovered during the criminal investigation. Hidden throughout the house were spare monitoring devices, backup data storage systems, and detailed floor plans of other homes in the neighborhood marked with optimal surveillance positions. The scope of her planning and preparation was breathtaking in its thoroughness and terrifying in its implications for privacy and safety. We preserved some of Karen's surveillance equipment as educational exhibits for our training programs, creating a working demonstration of how domestic surveillance networks operate and how they can be detected and defeated. The GPS tracker that had started the entire investigation was mounted in a place of honor in the main training room, accompanied by a detailed explanation of how it had been traced back to its source and used as evidence in the prosecution. The transformation of Karen's house into a cybersecurity training center became a powerful symbol for the entire neighborhood. The building that had once been the headquarters of an illegal surveillance operation was now being used to train professionals who would protect privacy and prevent similar abuses. Students from law enforcement agencies, corporate security departments, and privacy advocacy organizations came to learn about detecting and preventing unauthorized surveillance. I had a brass plaque installed beside the front door that read, "Invasion of privacy begins where trust ends." This phrase had become something of a motto for our firm, encapsulating the lesson that Karen's case had taught about the relationship between authority, trust, and the protection of individual rights. Every student who attended our training programs saw that plaque and heard the story of how unchecked authority and surveillance technology had been used to victimize an entire community. The training center also served as a research facility for developing new privacy protection technologies. We used Karen's former surveillance network as a test bed for developing countermeasures and detection systems that could help other communities identify and prevent similar abuses. The work we did there contributed to improvements in privacy protection that benefited people far beyond our own neighborhood. The educational impact of the training center extended beyond cybersecurity professionals, to include community leaders, homeowners association board members, and privacy advocates who needed to understand the technical aspects of surveillance abuse. We offered workshops for residents of other communities who were concerned about privacy violations in their own neighborhoods, teaching them how to detect unauthorized surveillance and protect their rights. The center became a pilgrimage site of sorts for privacy rights activists and victims of surveillance abuse from around the country. People who had experienced similar violations in their own communities came to learn about our case and to see how technology that had been used for oppression could be repurposed for education and protection. The transformation of Karen's house became a powerful metaphor for the possibility of redemption and positive change even after serious violations of trust. The neighborhood that Karen had tried to control through fear and surveillance became a model of community cooperation and mutual respect. Residents looked out for each other without invading privacy or demanding conformity to arbitrary standards. Property values actually increased after the Homeowners Association was dissolved, proving that Karen's authoritarian approach had been counterproductive as well as illegal. The psychological aftermath of Karen's surveillance operation affected our community in ways that became apparent only gradually over time. Sarah developed a heightened awareness of technology and privacy that influenced her career decisions, eventually leading her to pursue additional education in digital privacy law. She became an advocate for surveillance abuse victims and worked with Rebecca Morrison's law firm on similar cases in other communities across the state. The trauma of discovering that our most intimate moments had been monitored and recorded created lasting changes in how we approach technology in our daily lives. We implemented comprehensive security audits of our home networks and installed detection systems that would alert us to any unauthorized surveillance devices. The irony was not lost on us that Karen's violation of our privacy had made us more security conscious and better protected than we had ever been before. Other residents experienced similar transformations in their relationship with technology and privacy. The Chen family became privacy advocates in their professional lives, with Mr. Chen incorporating surveillance detection training into his corporate security consulting business. The Martinez family started a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating communities about homeowners association abuses and privacy rights. Mrs. Bryblake, by SEW.com. Patterson began teaching digital literacy and privacy protection to teenagers and young adults. The community's experience with Karen's surveillance state became a case study used in law schools, business schools, and public policy programs around the country. Students analyzed the case to understand how authority could be corrupted, how technology could be misused, and how communities could organize to protect their rights. The story was featured in textbooks on constitutional law, privacy rights, and residential governance. Sarah and I were frequently invited to speak at conferences and seminars about our experience and the lessons learned from Karen's case. We shared our story with Homeowners Association board members, privacy advocates, cybersecurity professionals, and law enforcement officers. Each speaking engagement reinforced our commitment to ensuring that other communities would not have to endure the violation and trauma that we had experienced. The annual anniversary of Karen's arrest became an informal community celebration of privacy rights and neighborhood cooperation. Residents gathered for block parties and potluck dinners that emphasized the values of mutual respect and trust that Karen had tried to destroy. Children who had grown up during Karen's surveillance regime learned about the importance of privacy and the courage required to stand up to authority when it overstepped its bounds. The training center we established in Karen's former home expanded its mission beyond cybersecurity education to include broader privacy rights, advocacy, and community organizing. We offered workshops for residents of other planned communities who were facing similar issues with authoritarian homeowners associations or privacy violations. The center became a resource for legal assistance, technical support, and emotional counseling for surveillance abuse victims. The success of our privacy protection programs led to partnerships with universities, civil liberties organizations, and technology companies working to develop better safeguards against surveillance abuse. Research conducted at the center contributed to the development of consumer-grade surveillance detection devices that ordinary citizens could use to protect their privacy in their own homes and communities. Karen's case also influenced the development of new ethical standards for cybersecurity professionals and surveillance technology manufacturers. Industry organizations adopted codes of conduct that specifically address the responsibility of technologists to prevent the misuse of their products for illegal surveillance. My company became a leader in developing ethical guidelines and best practices for the cybersecurity industry. The ripple effects of our experience continued to influence policy and legislation years after Karen's conviction. Federal privacy protection laws were strengthened to address the specific types of violations that Karen had committed. State regulations governing homeowners associations were revised to include explicit prohibitions against surveillance activities and clear penalties for association officials who abused their authority. Sarah and I never had to worry about GPS trackers or hidden cameras again, but the vigilance we had developed during Karen's surveillance campaign became a permanent part of our lives. Our neighbors had learned the hard way about the importance of privacy rights and the dangers of giving too much power to self-appointed authorities. The Genesis 7 Alpha device that had started the whole investigation was entered into evidence and became part of law enforcement training programs about detecting illegal surveillance. Karen Pemberton had tried to create her own little kingdom where she could control every aspect of her neighbors' lives. Instead, she had created the evidence trail that led to her own downfall and taught an entire community about the importance of standing up to bullies who hide behind authority. The GPS tracker she had planted to spy on my wife had forgotten one crucial detail. I owned the company that built it, and I knew exactly how to trace it back to her.